Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. My name is Pilar and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, a company where we help managers of remote teams to get the most out of online collaboration. You can find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com. Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. My name is Pilar and I'm your host. If we haven't met before, hello, welcome. And if you're a regular listener, well, you'll be delighted to hear that we have so many different interviews for the next few months that I'm really excited to share them with you, of course. And today is the first one of those. We took a short break during the summer. There's so many other podcasts you can listen to. I'm sure you didn't miss us that much. And today I'm delighted to introduce to you Jan Nieuweboer, who is, he works at Rabobank and he's the senior consultant on hybrid work there, as well as a spokesperson for future of work and hybrid working. And I met him at a conference back in June. And he was sharing the case study at Rabobank, how they had gone about introducing some new ways of working, how they'd taken into consideration the culture of the company, how they'd really listened to people, and how they'd experimented. I think the experimentation part is something that, in the way that they've done it, and I'm going to let him tell you about what that meant, might not be possible for a lot of organizations, because you'll hear that actually was quite an investment in a way. So I'm delighted to have him here on the show. We did have some problems with the recordings. I'd forgotten, because a lot of my guests record from home or in offices of small companies. But of course, Rabobank is a huge bank with amazing security. So we had to play around and go on a different platform. And rookie podcast mistake, I don't think I checked my microphone input. But anyway, Ross Winter, who polishes the show, will do a great job of just, well, making sure at least that audio quality is not an issue in this case for you to enjoy this fascinating conversation. Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. And well, after struggling with technology, because it's still, we always think everything is working smoothly and it doesn't always, but we are finally here. And I am so delighted to have with me someone I met at a conference, and that is the best thing about going to conferences, of course, is meeting people. And I saw the Jan's presentation, and I thought this was going to be of real interest to the listeners, because it's a nice case study, as well as hearing Jan's experience as a person. So, listeners, I'm delighted to introduce to you Jan Nieuweboer, who is the HR Innovation Manager at Rabobank in the Netherlands. So welcome, Jan.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes.
Great to be here. Finally.
Yes. So I think the best thing to do, we can start to get into this. So what we're looking here is at the journey of Rabobank moving from whatever it was doing before the pandemic, like many organizations, to some sort of hybrid setup. And you have been working on this with the team and leading the organization through this change. So I thought it'd be really interesting to hear this. Yeah. So can we get first some kind of context about Rabobank, the kind of organization, and especially the culture, just a little bit of sense?
Well, I think the most important thing to know about Rabobank is that we're a Dutch bank. So we started off in the Netherlands, actually this year, 125 years ago. And we've been working on servicing our clients in a broad banking sense within the Netherlands. But internationally, we're also a bank that is very much tied into the agricultural world. And that's because when we started off, we actually started off as being a cooperative set up to make sure that farmers in the Netherlands would be able to buy machines and stuff like that. So we have a background of a cooperative mentality, working together, having a situation where a lot of decisions were made low in the organization, right? So we had different cells, different banks within the Netherlands. I think we started off with almost 200 banks just in the Netherlands. But as a cooperative, that's a normal situation. We've changed due to regulations from the EU into a more standard bank, but we still very much allow us to work from that cooperative mentality. In terms of size, we have about 34,000 people working in the Netherlands and about 12,000 people working abroad. And abroad is as wide as you can think of. So from the north of America to Australia, New Zealand, and South America, we have quite a few people working there. It's a very international bank.
Yeah. Wow. Excellent. Thank you for that. I think that gives us a sense of, of the culture and the history, and also the size as well, which is very interesting. Mm-hmm. So when did you start to look at, and when was it obvious that actually the way in which you were working probably needed to change in order to just get through the next however many decades?
Well, I've been extremely fortunate in the fact that I've been working for the bank for 13 years now. And when I came in, I come from an educational technology background. So my perspective is on learning within the organization. And I started working at the Rabobank Academy at that time, trying to improve things in terms of learning within the bank. And then after a couple of years, I got more and more fascinated with other ways in which performance within the organization might improve, which is tied to change management, but also technology. I'm a bit of a technology lover. Mm-hmm. And so I carved myself this niche, which is now called HR Innovation Manager. And my primary focus from like maybe 8 years ago up until now has been on the future of work. So I'd been doing research, I'd been doing projects within the bank for a number of years, trying to prepare our organization for the future of work, which is much more a situation where people do complicated or complex work, where things need to be agile. And it's away from what we traditionally consider as, the way banks work, desks in a row and people, number crunch and stuff like that. It's going to be radically different. And about 3.5 years ago, when COVID started, we already had a sense of where we wanted to go. But then COVID put everything in an accelerator, right? We saw things happening that we thought would take a number of years before we got there. So after about a month into that process of the first lockdowns and stuff like that, I talked to a few people, including Janine Vos, our Chief Human Resource Officer. She's very into innovation as well. And I told her, from my observations, I see things actually moving in the direction that we wanted to go to in terms of future of work. So apart from all the bad things that are happening now and the things that we need to do, why don't you give me and a few other people the chance to look at the positive things that are also happening? And that sort of started off our journey into hybrid working 3.5 years ago. And I think we made a few very important and good decisions at the start of that process. One of them was that we wanted to work with a cross-functional team that comprised not only of HR people, but also people who are traditionally more on the IT side or on the facilities side, people from our financial department looking at the numbers and seeing, how can we build business cases in terms of what we're going to do with our buildings and stuff like that. So we really had a very diverse group of people working together and coming together there. And that, I think, was a major part of the success that we actually created.
Yeah. So what... Yes. What were the first steps then? Did you consult with your people?
The first thing was that we did a lot of employee listening. Mm-hmm. So the first thing was to sit on our hands, do nothing. Well, of course, not nothing, yeah. But we put out a lot of surveys, a lot of questionnaires. In the first phase, of course, it was just to make sure that people were okay. But along the way, we got more into, so how does working from home actually help you? And what is your perspective on when we go back? Would you like to? Because we saw that people really enjoyed working from home and, being able to concentrate and stuff like that. So we already sort of figured out that probably a hybrid model would be the best model, but that doesn't say anything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can do hybrid models in many different ways. So we really started listening to our people, and then after a while we started experimenting. So when things got, the whole COVID cycle, of course, it went up and down. And in a period where we could more easily have people go back to the office, we said, well, let's do an experiment. And we created an experiment where part of the building we refurbished completely from a perspective of, if people come to the office, they will do completely different things than they did before, or at least in a different ratio. So we had 3 teams that were doing different type of work into a refurbished office, and 3 teams that would be back in their normal offices that they had all recognized from before. And that just gave us so much information about, how do people behave in a different context in terms of the facilities and stuff like that. And, maybe it's not rocket science, but yes, we did see that people, when they got back to their old facilities, they started to behave in the old ways as well. And people in those new environments, they started to behave in new ways. They started to question, what are we doing here? Why are we using this space in the way we want to use this space? So we saw that actual change in the way we build our facilities actually helps having people be very critical and thoughtful about how we're using our resources, including our office spaces.
Yeah.
And that's what kicked off our idea about hybrid working at Rabobank. Yeah.
That is so fascinating, because it's the going back to the office. It's what is the office that people are going back to. That needs to be paid as much importance as to whether people can work from home or not. And just the fact, as you're saying, that if we go back to exactly the same environment is so important, and we go back to the same environment. So as well as just the fact that different versus so new versus old made a difference. Can you just paint us a picture of the places, what they looked like? So what was different in the new place? Just a very broad stroke.
Well, we said let's do the experiment in a way that that is perhaps a little bit more introducing more awkwardness for people than we think will be at the end. So we really pushed the concept of, for instance, not having any individual working places anymore in an environment. There were rooms where they just had these small chairs that you can sit on for about 15 minutes, and then your back will probably hurt. Well, that was on purpose, right? So we tried some things there, also with technology. I think the Microsoft Surface Hub was one of the. It was, I think, just out when we started doing experiments with it to see if people would be able to adjust to that type of technology and stuff like that. But I think there's an interesting story about that individual workplace, because that was sort of an eye-opener for myself. What we saw in that refurbished area is that the demand for the individual workplaces was still relatively high. So people asked for them. And we were a bit afraid that these people would start behaving in the same way that they did before. They just, they put a towel on their desk and say, this is my desk. And they would sit on it all day and doing concentrated work that they could be doing at home as well. And we didn't want that. But when we started diving in deeper and talking to people, we saw that the affordance of an individual workplace in a hybrid office is a different affordance of an individual workplace when you go to the classical offices. So in the classical way, people just went there. They might not have put the picture of their relatives on top of the desk, but it felt like their desk, right? And in that new situation, people said, well, I'm here to meet my colleagues, but around those meetings, I want to do a little bit of preparation. Maybe I have to do a little bit of work after a meeting. So I need somewhere where I can just put my laptop for a bit. So the sort of function of that individual workplace was not to sit there all day and do your work. It is a place where you can do a little bit of work alongside of those team meetings, retrospectives, creative, problem solving sessions and stuff like that we think should be in our office. So it made me realize that even though the physical layout of an individual workplace might be the same, the way people perceive those types of layouts and those types of working places might be vastly different in a hybrid context compared to the traditional context. Yeah. So never assume, right, is what we learned. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what else then from that? Well, actually, was there anything else that you had assumed that happened or didn't happen?
We were so positively surprised by the uptake of hybrid working in our organization. So the last survey we did, the numbers that we got from there were just amazing. 95% of people at Rabobank actually support the idea of working hybrid from now on. Mm-hmm. 95% is just it's a crazy amount, right? That's so high. So I think that is one of the big surprises. What is not very surprising is that we do see that people still, are struggling with the change. Mm-hmm. This is not something that we do, in a couple of months. It's very normal in these kinds of change processes to meet your barriers in the way you work as a team, the way you think about when to work from home, when to work as a team together here in for instance, in Utrecht, where I'm now. Yeah, so that's quite normal, and we're hitting that plate right now. So there's a bit of pushback within the organization. So one of the things we also came to understand really well is that telling people to come to the office 2 or 3 days a week is not going to make the difference. We very consciously created a policy based on putting teams in charge of understanding how our dynamics is going to be. When do we want to work in the office? When do we not want to work in the office? And pushing that down within the organization. So we didn't have a rule that states you have to be in the office 2 or 3 days a week. We did tell people, okay, we know meeting each other is really important. So we think in the order of around 2 days a week in the office is not a bad thing to have, right? More as a way of introducing expectations rather than a rule to work from. And we see that in practice. So most of the people work, between maybe a day and a half, 2 days a week in the office on average, depending a little bit on the department that they work in, at least in the Netherlands. Outside of the Netherlands, situations are a bit different because of their background and also because of the COVID restrictions that were different in different countries, of course. But talking about the Netherlands, we see these kinds of numbers popping up. And people are really happy about it. And the thing that they're struggling with is understanding how to behave in new ways in that new office. What are we going to do there? How are we going to prepare that? Is it necessary for me to be there? Yes or no? Is it okay for us to have colleagues who we haven't seen in real life for a couple of months? How are we dealing with those kinds of situations? How can we have a adult conversation within our team about our expectations? Now, these are not new things, right? This is not typical for hybrid work, but it's something that really surfaced over the last couple of months and saying, okay, these older problems that we might have had all along, they do surface more readily in a hybrid context. They become a little bit more pronounced, and you need to work on those.
Remote, whether it's hybrid or full remote, it always amplifies everything that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is why these things are such an opportunity, not just to work out which location suits best for what task and stuff, but actually it makes you really talk about how you're working together. And I suppose even as an individual to reflect.
Exactly. Yeah. So what we started off doing is something we still do. We do a lot of employee listening, but now in a different context. So we've created a number of tools that people can actually fill in as a team. And we have some Power BI dashboards that they can actually look at the results from their team. But these questionnaires are actually based on team performance and team improvement and stuff like that. Seeing how we can use the context of hybrid working to improve how we're doing as a team. And we created supportive materials with that. So if they do the questionnaire, then they can talk about it. And if they say, okay, for instance, improving our learning capability within our team is something that we want to tackle. We have some materials that can help them to do some experiments within their team and start working on that. So we try to get the learning cycle going without our hands-on support.
Yeah, and that's so crucial. Also, you've made the decision to let teams decide. So now you're supporting them in all these ways. I think that's amazing. And so
it's interesting, though, Pilar, that we have a very conscious policy, right? And the conscious policy is to not have an enforced policy, but do that at a team level. And people don't recognize it. They say we don't have a policy. I'm like, yeah, we do have, but it might not be the policy you would like to have as a leader, right? We're not going to give you, So that's an interesting one. So we meet a lot of leaders and executives who simply feel that it's a bit hard to comply to those non-rules.
Yes, well, that's not what. Well, that's maybe not what they're used to. Maybe not what's more comfortable. It's easier as well, and it is more difficult when you are in a team, whether you're leading it or as a member. It is more difficult to operate if you've been given that autonomy and that agency. Great, but you do have some principles or something. Do you have that I picked up and what are those, just to help? Of course, principles are great because they guide us.
We basically have 3 principles that we derived from our preliminary research and said, okay, we know that we have a lot of helpful tools available in terms of our digital infrastructure that are not being used to the fullest. One of our principles is, use digital as best as you can, basically. And if there's no need for you guys to come together because you can have a quick meeting on, in our case, Microsoft Teams, then do it by all means. But we wanted to also counter that with the fact that meeting each other is also a very important aspect. So our second principle is plan time for your team. Make sure you get together at times and make sure you use that to socialize, to learn from each other, to pick up things that are difficult online, and make sure you do that in the best way possible. And then the third principle that we introduced went beyond that and saying, okay, part of who we are as a cooperative is because we know people. The force of our organization is the force of the weak ties and the connections that we have, both with our clients, but also internally. So don't forget that and spend time and have time in your agenda. When you come to the office, for instance, don't push it to the limit in terms of your meetings, but, have an hour or so to just wander around and talk to people and maybe, grab a cup of coffee with somebody else, because those weak ties are important for the more creative, serendipitous type of behavior we need as well. So these 3 principles we introduced and used as a sort of a backbone for our way of working.
Yeah, it's great. I think that's the next stage, and I think something organizations never thought they'd see themselves doing is having principles and even guidelines to make sure that those internal networks continue to grow. And so we need to be so deliberate. I think
that's the next stage to really empower those networks and get them going out. I just had over the last 2 weeks, we have a few people who work as community managers within our organization. There's a few communities that are very strongly coming up. And we definitely see that, empowering those communities with tools and, visibility of those communities in the organization is going to be one of those factors that will help us move forward. Yeah,
very exciting. Jan, how are you for time?
Well, pushed, I see new meetings popping up, but I'm here for you right now.
Okay, well, I'll give us another 5 minutes is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm in a hall, and somebody else wanted to sit here and do some talking.
Excellent, because that is all fascinating, and I wanted to ask just for size as well of the organization. This experiment took place in Utrecht, the first experiment. Is that right?
In the Netherlands.
How are you approaching this as a global organization?
Well, so the principles we rolled out across the whole organization worldwide,
Mm-hmm.
but the way they were introduced within the local communities were a bit different. I mean, there's the Rio de Janeiro office is completely different than our office in Melbourne, right? So there's a huge difference in sometimes the tech savviness, even that, but also the type of work that's being done at the different offices. So here in the Netherlands, we have by far the largest group of people who are doing IT, who are doing financial reporting, stuff like that. So HR is by far the biggest here in the Netherlands compared to the other. So there's a lot of supportive functions being done here in the Netherlands who really benefit more, I think, from hybrid working than even the people who are client facing. They enjoy it, but they have already been accustomed to, going to their clients and coming back and doing some work in the office and now working from home and, doing some wrap up stuff or really concentrated stuff. So it opened up possibilities for them as well. But to give you an example, I think compared to the Netherlands, for instance, the London office chose to be a little bit more enforcing in terms of the number of days they wanted to have people in the office. Now, if you look at the numbers, it doesn't make that much of a difference. But the culture within the city is a little different. Interestingly enough, the Rabobank in the city is now being regarded as one of the more progressive organizations. And we're getting a lot of people who used to work for other banks who want to work for us because we have a good hybrid working facility and are progressive about it and, consider that our employees are adults who make good decisions and they're professionals. So,
Yes.
yeah, treat them as adults, right? So we see that hybrid working has become also a very important employee value proposition, and that's also really interesting for us, of course, because the war on talent is on. Everybody's trying to find people in a shrinking pond. So yeah.
Good. So Jen, just to wrap up, I don't know, what are your thoughts on where either the organization might look at next, or even the world in general, and just looking into the future, or even your own personal interest, just something to wrap us up. I don't know.
Well, I told you earlier that my main focus is on the future of work, right? And that hybrid working has sort of become an accelerator for moving into that future of work. But the future of work also means that, we talked about the talent ponds becoming smaller and smaller. If you look at aging within most Western economies, we're facing an unprecedented situation with a shrinking working population, an extremely shrinking working population. So we have to figure out new ways and to be even more productive and efficient than we are now. And up until now, hybrid working has been seen as sort of a goal to reach for, but we're right now at Rabobank, we're trying to transform that much more into a means to an end rather than the end itself. And the means is, hybrid working in conjunction with being agile, with asynchronous working and a lot of other things are pieces of the puzzle that make us actually move into that next area of productivity improvement. Things like next gen AI type of support, right? The ChatGPT type of things. Yeah, we have to figure out how that comes into play and how that's going to, collaborate with how we think about where work should be done, how work should be done, and stuff like that. So I think we're reaching at this point at Rabobank sort of a plateau in our change. And I think we need another North Star to be working for, in which, hybrid working is a means to an end rather than the end itself.
Well, Jan, thank you so much, Jan Nieuweboer, for this. I don't know. I think it's very refreshing. It's very inspiring, and it's just great to hear how it's going. Are there any contact details you want to give to listeners?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm always open for suggestions and ideas. And I like speaking, as you saw, Pilar. So,
yes.
So if there's any chance that I can spread the word about what we've been doing. I'm very open to that. In fact, it's part of my job. So that's one of the things that I really like about Rabobank. Things that we learn here, we like to share also, and not, use it as a competitive advantage per se, especially in the HR field. We all need to work together to make this world a better place. And that's, our mission, growing a better world together. And if this helps, I'm all for it.
A big thank you to Ross Winter for polishing the audio of this episode. And thank you, listeners, for choosing to listen to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Ortiz. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.